Right, so it's fair to say that Rishi Sunak's 5 promises, which he plans to deliver ahead of the next general election, are not going very well. He, of course, has promised to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce the national debt, bring down NHS waiting lists, and stop the votes. Well, the stop the votes policy has been rejected as unlawful by the Court of Appeal. So that has now delayed that, pushed it back as the government seeks to go to the Supreme Court now. Such is their determination to distract the nation from issues of real importance with their dead cat strategy of convincing us to blame refugees from war zones for all of our woes, coming here, stealing our, detention centres? Can't be jobs, they aren't allowed to work. But if they were, that might help grow the economy. It's your other pledge, isn't it? Plenty of jobs nobody here wants to do, after all. Massive shortages in hospitality and health, as well as other sectors. Daffodils to pick, veg to pick, fruit to pick. Housing? Well, it's not their fault this country hasn't been building enough for decades, because homes suddenly became investments instead of roofs over heads. But there we go. Migrant bashing, isn't it? NHS waiting lists, well, they're heading towards the 5 million person mark now, the biggest backlog in NHS history that Sunak is presiding over right now. And the government debt has now risen to be above 100% of GDP for the first time since 1961, £2.6 trillion, much of it created by new money being made without hiking taxes to cope with the cost of living crisis and the inflation rise that's created, and that's all added to the national debt. So he's on quite the roll there too, failing on every front, but hey, he's got to the next election to achieve those, hasn't he? End of next year, isn't it? Surely. We'll all accept one pledge. I've missed one there, didn't I? You see, his promise to halve inflation, he stated to do that by the end of this year, not by the end of next year, not when the next election is expected. No, he may push it back yet. He's weak, he's weaselly, it's the kind of thing he'd do. He'd tell us it's a tough decision. He'd blame Russia, probably. He'd blame the cost of living as well, I expect. He wouldn't blame Brexit. He wouldn't blame vast overblowing profiteering, and he certainly wouldn't blame himself for still refusing to tax the rich adequately, because if he did that, he might just have a cat in hell's chance of achieving his target. But he's one of those rich people. He doesn't want to tax himself more. Now, corporations making big profits is normally something the Tories love, of course, but knowing even the mainstream media is covering this as disaster capitalism, when the IMF have published evidence that the cost of living across Europe, not excluding ourselves, of course, we still belong to the continent after all, has been driven by greedflation, the corporate profits being made, it's an issue he can't ignore, though might not want to draw too much attention to, as it would offend the delicate ideologies of those daft enough or rich enough to support him. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, has, not widely reported, been holding talks with various watchdogs, whoa, important stuff, to find out what they're doing about excessive corporate profiteering in their respective sectors, what they can do about it, what powers they actually have or don't have to deal with what needs to be dealt with, which tells me, for one, the government doesn't know a lot about its own watchdogs, though, as I've often said, they're just a handy tool to blame when things go wrong. We're up shit creek without a paddle. Who's nicked it? Off Gem or off what or one of the others, whoever, as long as it isn't the government. Surely the government should know what structures, what laws, what controls it has at its disposal. Doesn't seem to. The Chancellor is having to go and ask others. No wonder we're screwed. Chancellor, more like, not Chancellor. Anyway, it doesn't give me much faith they're going to get a handle on this inflation issue anytime soon. And with Sunak already massively unpopular in the country, unelected, more failure is a bad look, more polling woes ensue, making for more nervous backbench Tories worry about their seats. He's presided over scandals from Nadeem Zahawi's taxes to Dominic Raab's bullying. He's screwed up his Rwanda deportation cruelty. He's been seen to be benefiting personally from the likes of the vaccine rollout to Russian money via his wife's firm, and making policy over childminding that seemed little more than an excuse to send more money to his wife's own business interests in that sector too. He's fouled up regarding Boris Johnson and the Partygate inquiry by aiming to sue the inquiry, making people wonder what might be in it that he doesn't want getting out. And it's all amounted to a pretty disastrous premiership that is still in its first year. He seems to have been there forever now, doesn't he? It's still in its first year. And now, the prospect of him not even having a second year can't be ignored either. The pressure's building. The failure is mounting up. The desire by the Tory party to bin him off, although it's not there at the minute, they're too scared. They've nobody to really replace Sunak with anyway. They're in end of days mode, a lot of them, even if some would deny that. And certainly Sunak himself doesn't want his premiership to end so quickly. And I say that with reference back to the inflation issue, which he doesn't seem capable of addressing, despite us being told not long back inflation will come down all on its own. Well, it isn't. Now, perhaps they will get a handle on this. There's still half a year to go to get inflation halved from when the pledge was made. It was 10% at the time. It's now 8.7%, having remained that from April into May. So that's not looking good right now. But who knows? Something might shift. Maybe he will finally do what he has to, but I can't see it happening. Capable is not a word I'd associate with him. So what then? Call an election? If he fails to make this promise by the end of the year, then he's going to get rinsed for it. Then he has failed his 5 promises full stop, because 5 for 5 is what he promised. So what are his options? Resign and throw the party into chaos? Stay on and aggravate his own MPs and the public even more? He needs to change things up somewhere. Call the election early, maybe. Final throw of the dice. What would he have to lose? Well, power, obviously, but that looks likely anyway. Behind the scenes, though, you know the Tories are cooking up some proper nasty strategy to take on Labour at the ballot box. Every one of Starmer's lies are being catalogued and set aside to be used to weaponise against him. And after all those local election attack ads he aimed at Sunak personally, Starmer has asked for the Tories to give him both barrels, which I have no doubt they're prepared to do. Playing on Starmer's dishonesty would be pretty effective. There's plenty of it. There's so much ammo there. And you might be thinking, well, that's a bit rich, Damo, though. Since when was there a night for an honest Tory? And yeah, you'd be completely right. But they don't need to convince the public of their own honesty. They just need to convince them of Starmer's dishonesty in order to sow doubt among the electorate and apathy towards both leaders that are being created now all by themselves. He's also being heckled by the opposition to do just this if he fails to hit his inflation target. And actually, there's further danger that Sunak will fail if he doesn't distance himself and his actions from the idiot running the Bank of England, who insists wage increases are to blame still, not that having enough to live on will trouble that pompous Burke. Sunak has failed to do so, revering the independence of the BOE. But if he doesn't deal with Andrew Bailey's repeated failure to deal with inflation, literally his only job, by constantly putting up interest rates like a madman because he doesn't do anything different, and he's done it 13 times straight now, it's another disaster looming for him headed into an election when it comes. What do you reckon? Will Sunak go for an early election as inflation remains stubbornly out of control for him, or will he be too chicken and bet on others in his party being even more cowardly to dare try to remove him as the election gets closer regardless, even if he ends up failing his inflation target towards the end of this year? And after you've liked, shared, and subscribed to the channel, as I sincerely hope you will, I hope you appreciated the video. You can stick around a bit longer and watch another one, this vid, amongst hundreds of others to peruse at your leisure, of course, where Sunak looks set to hike our energy bills once again. Another thing to make him popular come the election, no doubt. And, well, I'll catch you on the next video, I hope. Cheers, folks.